into building mobile apps with Appcelerator Titanium. Quick agenda. Plan on going through some quick introductions here, both from our side and from your side, of course. Then what I'd like to do is do some high-level work, going through the mobile development process, then transitioning into an overview of Titanium, and then starting to get into a little bit more details on the technical side, showing you some code examples and trying to get you a little familiar with it. First things first, my name is Andrew Zuercher. I'm a co-founder of E2E Applications, End-to-End Applications. Was originally an employee of Appcelerator before they got funding and moved out to the Valley. Also here with me is Ali Faith. Ali, if you mind, yeah, cool. We've been building mobile applications using the Titanium framework for over 3 years now. So we've seen a lot of different flavors of it. Just to get an idea in the room, how many people here are developers? As I thought, how many people here are web developers? How many people here feel really comfortable with JavaScript? All right, and how many people here have done mobile development above and beyond outside of that? Objective-C or Java or anything like that? Cool. And who has used the Titanium platform before? Okay, excellent. All right, thank you very much. That helps out quite a bit. Before we jump into too much about Titanium, just to give you an idea of some of the applications that we've built to get an idea of what you can build successfully with Titanium. Ready GA is something done for the Georgia Emergency Management. It's a state-based application helping out with awareness for disasters when they come. And some of the key features that we put into that were geolocation, mapping, and accessing of remote data. That's available both on Android and also on iPhone. Another application that's, if you go to our iTunes account and Android account, you'll see is the Sony Ericsson Open that we did with SAP. Sony Ericsson Open is a Miami-based tennis tournament that's just outside the top 4 majors. And that targeted both iPad, Android, and iPhone applications. And did a lot of real-time data and scoring. Outside of that, we've also done another application called VinViper, which is used by car dealers to go and assess cars when they visit a lot. They can scan the inside of the door, capture camera information, and in that application we do both local offline storage inside the application as well as access outside remote data. Scout Mob is another example, one of our first applications that we built. Is pretty popular in Atlanta. It's a daily deals type of site with mobility for Android and iPhone. And then a recent one that we've done that's only available in Germany is with Carlsberg for buddy beers, which allows you to, when you go to a bar, buy your buddy a beer. And that includes integration for Facebook, for centralized login and contact management, as well as PayPal, so you can do transactions on the phone. So these are some of the things that you can do with it. Whenever we get introduced with new people that are looking to do development, it's always kind of a learning curve. But I think that if you have a web development background, it's really going to help you out. And a lot of the same processes that go into building a web application also go into doing a mobile application. For us, the things that we usually start off with are not huge pages and pages of use case documentation, but executable mockups. And so I put up here as a link Balsamiq as being a good one, but really anything that allows you to identify whether it's digital or actual paper, something with individual screens, arrows going to them so that you can see the idea of the flow, and that helps us out with being able to estimate and understand what it is that's going into an app. And sometimes our clients are able to do that, sometimes not, but I think it's an important first step to get an idea of what it is you're looking to do. The next step after that is a logical step, and I think this is what happens in most web applications, is we get some creative talent involved, and their output is going to be an Adobe Photoshop file or some sort of like rich set of assets that are going to be the input for us to then go ahead and cut up and actually turn it into a real application. So both those two previous steps we're obviously engaged with, but from a development standpoint, I think the real work really starts to kick in step 3, which is wireframing. And I think that if you were to look at the amount of time that we spend on our applications, I would say 40% of it is spent on styling. And it's important. I think that building a good-looking application is where the traction hits pavement. It's really important for it to not only be a generally pleasing experience from a functionality standpoint, but also an aesthetically pleasing implementation for what you're looking to do. Because it is JavaScript and because this really is a multi-tiered or distributed system that you're building for most of the applications that we encounter, we're not traditionally doing applications that are standalone fart apps or something like that. We're looking at something that is going to integrate and work with another webbing service. We'll go ahead and mock that out a lot of times if the APIs are available or development's happening in parallel, and go ahead and mock those out with then integrating them after a large chunk of the work's actually been done. And then the last piece in there is testing. And I say that testing as kind of an afterthought because usually spending a lot of time certifying on a device while you're midstream in a development process, it's useful and it builds satisfaction, but it can also hold you up. And so a lot of times we'll use the actual simulators and development tools, but it is a drastic difference between getting your application running in the simulator and then actually getting it working on a variety number of different devices. All right, so some kind of high-level questions, and I get this a lot, is a lot of times our clients will come in, they'll ask, what should we do first? Should we do one first? Should we do both at the same time? And it kind of depends on what it is that they're looking to do, obviously. Sometimes there are other restrictions and business reasons that go into it, but some of the key inputs I think that are important to highlight, at least from a technical standpoint, is just kind of understanding the nature of the beast for both Android and iPhone. I think that also you could look at, in addition to this, other platform targets being, mobile web in the case of HTML5 application or BlackBerry, for example. But for the most part, when we do our work, people are asking us about either iPad or Android tablet, or they're talking about an Android device or an iPhone device. App approval for Apple is quite a bit different than for Android. For Apple, you can sign up obviously as an individual, or you can sign up as a corporate identity. And the big difference for the corporate identity is obviously your corporation name is on the branding and in the marketplace. In both of those scenarios, you actually have to sign legal paperwork, and you have to do proof of your corporation, and it just getting to the point of actually becoming a member can take quite a bit of time. On the contrary, for Android, really all you need is about 10 minutes and a credit card and you're good to go. So that just tells you about what it takes to kind of get ready or get your account signed up. To actually get into the store, Android is just as simple as it is to actually set up the account. And in our case, we've had some very challenging times with Apple. It's pretty stringent, and they've changed the guidelines quite a bit. So I can't go into too much details, I think, because their terms of service kind of regulate me to not talk about it. That just gives you an idea of what it's like. Some people ask for me to get an idea what is kind of the lead time that you should give into an application. And I've said in the past, 5 or so business days is usually a good fast pace to get yourself and get your application approved and ready. But there's really not a heck of a lot that you can do once you've submitted your application to Escalated. And again, if you do get rejected, I think adhering to and doing exactly what they say, that's the best thing to do. So no Don Quixote, don't fight the windmills, I would recommend. On the development tool standpoint, they're very different. For Android, it means Eclipse, which for me is kind of tedious and slow, especially when you have the the opposite, but Xcode being extremely fast, the simulator is running very quick. For some reason, Android is just very, very slow to run in comparison between the tool. I'll get into this in a little bit more, but Titanium provides an IDE that you can use to both manage and create your individual projects as well as launch them and create the artifacts for submitting them to the stores as well as running them on the device. On top of that, performance and speed is quite a difference. This used to be quite a big delta. I used to find that the iPhone was much faster, applications ran much faster, but Android has done a good job of catching up in this area. Prettiness and usability. I know this isn't really a very objective point to bring up, but for me, it's just completely different. I'm a big fan. I've tried to use an Android as an everyday device, and I can't. Just the interactions, the transitions, and everything else. What it is automatically given to you when you build an iPhone application. It's just far more refined, I think. Now, the big thing that I kind of jumped on Apple for the approval process, I think that you could equally kind of look at this on the other side for testing. Right now, there are, let me roll it back. As of 3 weeks ago, there were 547 different hardware devices that you can certify your Android application on. And I think in one way that's a great thing because it allows multiple hardware vendors come into it, and it really opens up what it is that many can do, provide different options and cheaper alternatives, but it makes supporting your application, submitting your application, a nightmare. That's just one variable in the three-pronged opportunity that you have for being able to cover your application. One being the hardware platform, another one being the version of the Android OS that you're supporting, and the third being the carrier network that you're working on. And often those two latter points kind of go hand in hand because normally the carrier is going to dictate to you what version of the Android OS and flavor it is that you're going to have is going to be. We've also seen some framework issues in the Android OS that have, we don't know how they've gotten past testing, to be honest, in the past. For example, unique IDs no longer existing on the phones and things of that nature. So it's just something really to keep in mind. I guess at a high level, if we usually kind of go in the process of first rolling out on iPhone and then rolling out on Android. It's just kind of the next step because of some of this stuff. If anybody has questions on it, please feel free. Moving into Titanium and on its identification, what does it mean? Well, for one, it's a native advantage, and what I mean by that is that there are other frameworks that are out there that allow you to target multiple devices, but they're not truly native. For example, Appcelerator, when they first started out, they had this concept of web views, and web views are basically just it's like an embedded Safari, for example, on iOS. And what you would do is you create this housing around it, package it into a native application, but really everything that you did was HTML and CSS and JavaScript, which is great. You're working with the only JavaScript elements you're really working with are going to be DOM-related components, for example. The difference on this is that it doesn't perform as well, it doesn't feel native, and it doesn't allow you to take advantage of ton of other native components that are available for it. I'll kind of come back to this in the next slide on the architecture. But another thing that Appcelerator really does is they try to provide a single framework where you can target multiple platforms. The two I've obviously already talked about are Android and iPhone, but also they've recently come out with a GA version of their BlackBerry target. And I know they've also been working pretty hard on the HTML5 side. So those are pieces of it. This talk isn't about the desktop, but that's another thing that was part of their original offering was the desktop implementation. So that if you want to, you can build applications that target Linux, Mac OS, or Windows. Another big piece to it, and I think you see this in a lot of the frameworks that are available today, is Appcelerator is open source. And so I think that's a great in that you can take a look. I think that developers tend to write better code when they know other people can see what they're writing, and I also think it's advantageous in not only being open source, but if you, for example, want to be a contributor, you can fill a contributor agreement with Appcelerator and become a contributor yourself, and that's pretty cool. Herd mentality kind of goes in hand with open source, but I think the big thing to understand is that Appcelerator's been through its third round of funding, and it's got over 30,000 applications that have been written, and over 1.6 million developers worldwide. So it's not just here in the States by any means at all. And I think that, you know, with herd mentality, you know, you have a better chance of surviving. Beyond the platform, things that Appcelerator does, in addition to just providing these tools, is they have a marketplace where you can purchase other existing modules. For example, I told you a little bit about the PayPal component. That's something that's not part of their core API, but is available for you to use. Bump, for example, as a component is available for it. There's one for Urban Airship, which is a integration for doing messaging and push notifications to your phones, both for Android and for iPhone, and I think BlackBerry as well now. But if you take a look at this, it's meant for two things. One is a way for people to understand they can extend the Titanium platform themselves, but also a way that you can create a marketplace so that you can generate revenue for yourself if you want to, in addition to submitting apps to the store, but help other developers as an audience to procure the work that you've been done. On top of this, they also have a component called Appcelerator Analytics, and it's pretty interesting that it automatically creates analytic events for you based upon the number of installs, the geographic region, and things of that sort. But you can extend that and create application events. So if you're really into usability, you can track what are the sweet spots in your application that users are actually visiting, and use that to tune your applications potentially. I think the big thing is that it creates a unification for data across both the Android and the iOS platforms in a way that's it's easy to consume as those who are actually creating their applications. We find a lot of our clients really find this interesting for them to be able to understand as the app is being adopted to get an idea how their campaigns are working as well. Above and beyond those two other pieces, I think the number one thing is Appcelerator's service and support. We have an enterprise agreement with them or a partnership with them, so it gives us full access to it. But I think if you're looking to do an enterprise class application and you want to roll it out, then having the support is going to help you out quite a bit if you hit any framework issues of any sort. The Titanium architecture, I'm not too sure if you can see that slide too terribly well. The one on the left is basically for the mobile applications, and so the one on the right is. They both are, but for the most part, the big difference being that the JavaScript virtual machine is basically instantiated for you with individual native components that are exposed as JavaScript symbols that you can then use to directly invoke. So people sometimes come up and ask me, what happens with the JavaScript? Does it compile down into Objective-C? You know, is this bytecode? Is there something else going on? And the answer is that it is compressed. Your JavaScript is compressed as you would compress it for any web application. But in all truth, basically all it's doing is just going through the proxy layer. And so because of that, this is one example where the Android implementation has an opportunity to improve. I think the new seed funding that Appcelerator got is moving out the Rhino JavaScript interpreter to Queen V8, and hopefully that'll help out with increasing the speed of the implementation. I bring this up and kind of let you know that this is kind of the way how the architecture is set up, because it also gives you as a developer a better understanding for how to troubleshoot your application. You'll have the ability to take a look directly at the source code because it is open source, take a look at the proxies, and sometimes there are things that are documented or not documented that this will help you out to move to that next step. Titanium features. Obviously, the native UI components that I talked about before, that's a pretty big one. Location APIs, and by that I mean not just for you to be able to figure out current location, do reverse lookups and things of that nature, but also in integration with some map components on the devices are fantastic. Local and remote data. For local data, you have access to a SQLite database. You also have access to system properties. For remote data, I think there are 3 or 4 different types, but the key thing that you'll be using for accessing remote data that we use is their HTTP client. The HTTP client, basically, we use it for downloading assets if we need to, but mostly it's for hitting RESTful JSON-based services. And I think since Web 2 stuff came out, that's been kind of a cornerstone if you've done a lot of AJAX work, but that's all we talk with really. And I think that XML, although it is accessible to you, I'm not talking about it in this talk, if you have the ability to move your backend services to JSON, you'll see a tremendous improvement both on performance and also just ease of implementation on your side as well. Social APIs, Facebook is available kind of out of the box directly within it, and you can do a couple different things depending on the version of Titanium that you're using, but I think with the most recent one, you can either do basically the in-app single sign-on, which uses kind of a web view, standard Facebook way, or you can do it where it'll actually call out and then call back into your application. So, for example, if you have the Facebook app on your phone, you'll use that authentication mechanism. The big thing for the social APIs is obviously you have complete access to the Facebook Graph API. From a Twitter standpoint, I don't think that there's anything really directly available. One thing that we've seen in the past is OAuth implementations for you to be able to access Twitter, which can kind of be a pain if you're not using that. And I'm not too sure if there's a module for it, but in the past we've used some lightweight JavaScript implementations. There's some open source OAuth JavaScript libraries that are out there, and it's pretty easy to bring into your app. You can also use WideQL if that's something that marks your attention, but there are just a wealth of different ways of doing not just social, but mashup type of integration on in your applications. Another thing that's really important for the media standpoint, audio, video, we've helped out quite a few other people there doing things like talks and things of that sort where they're showing video on the phone. A lot of integration with YouTube, as you might expect, it's pretty robust for the most part. Messaging, I think this is kind of important. The guys at Appcelerator come from a pretty big messaging standpoint. Some of their older RIA toolkits were based around this, but they have the idea that you can really send messages inside of your application. So the idea is that you can fire messages and then have multiple receivers. So it's standard pub sub, which is pretty good. It was a crucial feature to have back in an older version of Titanium, and I'll kind of get into how messaging kind of plays and what it is that you can do to it later on when we get to some coding examples. Contacts, very useful, especially in that case for buddy beers, for example. You have complete access to the address book, and it's pretty seamless, and this is built into the API. Inside a project, when you create a project, you'll see something called appdate.js, and basically you can think of this as what it is that you do to set up your main thread for your project. And I think a lot of newbies, when they first start off and they see some of the templates that are implemented for you, and I'll show you guys what that looks like. But we use it basically as a very, very lightweight place to inject our dependencies and kind of set up a lot of our base components. The way how you're able to really decompartmentalize and segregate your application is through the usage of tie, where tie is the namespace .include. So when you access the Titanium library, basically there's a global variable of Ti, and everything comes underneath that. Ti includes allows you to create several different JavaScript files inside of your application, and then load them dynamically. And it's obviously depending on the size of your app, but when you have multiple developers and everything else, it's quite important. Application events, which I kind of touched on a little bit. You can use this to be able to invoke items that are in different contexts. The key thing I want to kind of get into if you're coming from a web world is that from a component standpoint, a window is essentially a page, and a view basically maps to a div. And here are some of the controls that are made available to you. You have the ability to do animations and do transforms on assets, and that's in the form of 2D, 3D matrices, etc. Some of this kind of standard dialogues are lure email and option dialogues. Some of the finer detailed components kind of get into it that kind of make up your application. What's aggregated in a container are going to be your buttons, button bars, labels, text fields, and text areas. And then containers, for example, the dashboard items for like a Facebook type of application. Table views are what it is that you use to be able to display multiple items inside of a list. Image views, just essentially a background image. Web views being if you want to include some other, basically embedding like Safari inside of your application. So here's a lightweight coding example. I think before I jump into this though, I'm going to show you how to create an application with Titanium. So this is Titanium Studio. As you can see, it looks a lot like Eclipse. So you have to create an app ID whenever you create an application. So if we take a look here out of the box, I'm not sure if you guys can see that or not, but there's this app. There's this app.js. And what they do inside of here is they create a tab group. Then they're individually creating a window, and you can see this titanium.ui.xxx where you to be able to create the individual component that you want. Then tabs, since inside of the actual tab group you have individual tabs, a tab is associated with a window. There's a label that's created for the first window, and then it's added, and they do the same thing for the other window here. Tabs are added to the tab group, and the tab group is opened. So this is essentially all the logic that's done to kind of a hello world to get you running inside of here. I'll go ahead and run it. Takes a little bit the first time. Kind of give you a little bit more details of what's going on behind the scenes. Appcelerator, when you actually create the project, it copies and includes all of Appcelerator source code as opposed to giving you a binary. And so what it was doing is doing a full compile, including Appcelerator, over 250 different classes. So that's a one-time hit that you'll have just once. The reason why that was done way back when was to get around Apple's terms of service so that you were never pre-packaging anything, so you had complete source. So here we can take a look at what it is that was created. It's just two tabs, one saying I'm window 1, one saying I'm window 2. This is one way that you can write your application. Obviously, this turns into a pretty big file. And I have seen some of our clients with multi-thousand lines inside just one app.js. Another way to kind of split this off, just kind of going in here, was this concept of a multi-context. So in the case of a multi-context, what I've done is I've created my window. You'll see right here that I specify a URL for the window. Otherwise, you'll see it's pretty much the exact same code that I had before. The one big difference being that inside my window.js, everything's kind of in its own scope. And so the way to kind of think of this would be that each of your individual windows has a completely scoped version or interpreter for JavaScript. And this is great if you're kind of a sloppy coder, for example, and you may have name collisions. The other thing that it's great for is that when that window gets torn down, that whole JavaScript scope is kind of isolated from everything else, and so it'll get torn down on its own. The downside is when you build a large application, you need it to communicate with all these different windows. It's not usually just one window running off completely on its own. And that's where the application events kind of came in. So the ideas would be, maybe you write your window.js this way, but you fire events from one and you put listeners in different parts of your app. It allows them to respond differently. So here you can see I'm using something called tie.ui.currentWindow. This is how you get the handle to know what window is actually being invoked inside when you specify the URL. Otherwise, everything looks pretty much identical. The alternative way to do this is not to do that. And this is something that we kind of turned around and started doing most of our apps this way about a year ago or so. And so you'll see that this is a modified version of the app.js, so assume that the other stuff wasn't in there before. You'll see that I include two files. I include something called speakers.js and something called webservice.js. And really the key thing to really kind of pay attention on is that I instantiate these two kind of logical objects that I've created and define someplace else. I inject the web service into the speaker so it knows how to get the data. So the idea behind this would be, I'd be building a speakers application, or let's say an event application for a conference, where I'm going to be looking up all the speakers. I'm going to display it in table view, for example. So in this, you'll see that instead of creating the window explicitly or using the URL, in the line right above where I define win2, I use speakers.createWindow. So let's take a look here in some of the code. Here's the speakers.js that I've defined. And you'll see that I kind of clipped some of the stuff in here, but you'll see that I explicitly create the window in here, and I don't specify a URL for it. I define a table view, and then I return, basically return this object. And this is nice. For one reason is that it's not created until it actually needs to be created, and I've also done this in a way that's pretty seamless. Next part here is, this is kind of getting into what I was talking before about mocking out web services. So when you define your web services, it's definitely asynchronous, and so you have to deal with callbacks, and that's something that we do a lot. So you'll see my notation, I put lambda in here, but essentially just think of it as a callback function after it gets completed. So there isn't really anything asynchronous going on inside of my implementation while I'm in this mock mode, but I've written it this way because when I actually call an actual web service, it's going to be asynchronous in nature. So you see basically he returns back a list here. Now if we look at the rest of the speakers here, you'll see that there's a get speakers function, and inside of it, it calls webservice.getSpeakers, simulating the asynchronous nature, and then he adds it to basically by calling the local add speaker function of my object. So let's take a look at this kind of in action here. So I left window 1 in there. Here's window 2 with the four items in there. So I guess the big difference obviously is that I left the old code in here, but it's just much cleaner to kind of work it this way. I think that it gives you a stronger understanding of how to code with Titanium, and it's a little bit cleaner, I think. Xcode. So the other piece I want to kind of focus on here is that inside of your Xcode project, you can create custom modules. And so I'm not going to go into details on how to do that, but Appcelerator basically provides you with some Xcode libraries so that you can create a new project, and the project type can be an Appcelerator module itself. And that basically, you create what they call a proxy, and that exposes the JavaScript components. Like I said before, your project source is available to you. Bring it up over here. So here's the build directory. You see in iPhone, and then you'll see in here under classes, these are all the Appcelerator, all the sources directly available to you. So there are times, for example, when I'm running through something and I may not be able to do something, I'll go inside of here and try to figure out what's going on. And I think it's very good until Appcelerator has completely documented their whole API. There's obviously some things that are not documented that are important for you to be able to use. But it's just good for you to kind of know that. Kind of going through the rest of the directory structure here. The resources where everything really lies, you have an Android and iPhone subfolder. And the idea behind that is that when Titanium packages your application, it'll conditionally use those different folders. So if you have assets, for example, or images, they're only applicable to Android, then you keep them here, versus iPhone in the other. You could do the same kind of concepts with JavaScript if you had like a JavaScript version of your component in non-JavaScript, but there are other ways to do that type of conditional logic that might be a little bit better. But the underlying understanding for this is just pretty much everything goes into the resources directory here. There's another file here, tyapp.xml, and this is where your configuration for your different projects was kind of always done traditionally in the past. And so if you're importing a project or renaming a project or building it, this is what Titanium will use as an input before it actually goes and recreates the Xcode project, for example. So in Titanium Studio over here, if I were to go, for example, delete my build directory, which had my iPhone project in, I could go here, restart, and it'll regenerate everything. So the upside on this, and the reason why it's important, is if you want to move from Titanium 1.7 to 1.8, you're probably going to want to blow away your old project in your old directory. And so I obviously know how to do this because we've done this for several times, and if you're going to support an app, it's important to know it. Next step here is the kitchen sink. So if you're interested in taking a look at Titanium, I think the good place to start really is the kitchen sink. And I've got it over here. I'll kind of bring it up real quick. Kitchen sink is kind of broken down with these tabs at the bottom to give you an idea of examples of pretty much anything that you can do, well, most of everything that you can do inside the application. And this is good because when the guys from Titanium roll this stuff on out, or new releases, they test against this. And also, it's really good in that if you want to know how to do something, you can easily take a look at the coding examples and the snippets that come along with it. And all this stuff is hosted up on Git. As a side note, if you're looking to version control your application, Git is going to be the way to go. I've run into some shops that are big, that used to be really big in Subversion. They're definitely behind the times, but the way how Titanium looks at the assets in the different folders, you need to have something that's just only at the root and doesn't populate all the way down your source tree. So this is I'm not going to go into too much details on the kitchen sink here, but like I say, it's a great example to give you an idea of what's available on the platform. The other thing too that's important is the API docs, and I've actually posted this keynote up on Twitter, so if you want, you can download and take a look. But the API docs, once you've signed in, by the way, you can sign in without paying or signing up for an account. So I know you may see that, but you can get into it, no problem at all. Here are the docs. It's pretty well laid out. So what I was saying before about all the different components and everything else that you can implement, it's all HTML based, and so it's pretty easy. There's word that they were going to move some of this documentation to a wiki. Celery has a concept of something called the Titans for those who use Titanium a lot and kind of help build up a community. We're members of it, but they have a site that's available that has a wiki that's going to be helping to support and be more collaborative rather than just the guys at Celery are generating the documentation themselves. I think that's all I had on here. I wanted to leave plenty of time for questions for anybody that has anything that they'd like to know about Titanium. Anybody have any questions? Yes?
Do you support Windows Mobile yet?
I do not believe that that's not only, I know that they do not support it right now, but I don't know if that's on the roadmap, to be honest. I think the big play right now on their side is probably going to be HTML5, but I'm no longer part of those roadmap discussions anymore.
Probably really a naive question, but I don't have a smartphone.
Yeah.
So can you make an app and just use it for yourself, or does it have to be published somewhere where you can even use it on phone?
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't go into that, but that's important to know actually, because for two things. We usually, when we're developing apps, if we wait until it's published in the App Store, then I mean, it's not a process you want to get to having other people test and get used to it. There are a couple different options available to you on the Android side. One, you can actually publish through the actual over the wire. The other one to do it is if you take what they call an APK, which is their published format, serve it up on any website and actually open that URL on your Android device, then you can download it and install it. So Android is really, really open. You don't have to worry about certificates or anything like that, about devices actually being enabled. On the other side, for the Apple side, if you're an enterprise class corporation, which my company's not, I think you have to fill a whole bunch of stuff at Dun & Bradstreet and be over 1,000 employees or something like that. Then you can have what they call an enterprise licensing scheme, where you can submit apps into your enterprise account, and then other people who have access to that account can then go ahead and download them and install them directly on the device. The other options that they're available that we do is we create development profiles. So I didn't go into this, but Apple has a pretty sophisticated mechanism for provisioning applications. And its lockdown is really, really tight, but it's also a real big pain. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and, for example, let's say we got 4 people on the team. I'll have them go and get the UDID, which is this unique device identifier, off their phone, send it to me. Then I'll go ahead and provision that. And then what I'll do is I'll go and I'll create my actual IPA file with that signature from that profile. You can then ship that directly and have them sync it through iTunes, or we use another tool called Diawi. I'll bring it up real quick here for you. Diawi is pretty cool. Diawi allows you to do this, so you just kind of drag and drop your IPA and your provisioning profile onto here, and then gives you a URL. Just mail that to everybody else that you want, and boom, they're good to go. Right now, time. I guess got time for one more question. And I'm happy to answer questions out in the hall afterwards too. Anyone? Excellent. Well, thank you. I appreciate it.